Okay, so we're pretty close now. We have our game working more or less as we'd like. So the bird can fly through the air and we can detect collisions between the bird and the pipes and indeed the bird and the floor. And when they happen, at the moment, we have contact printed to the logs. So in order to complete the game then, we really need two things. We need our scoring system, so we need a way of detecting that the bird has passed through the pipes and a way of keeping score. And then when the bird does eventually die, we need to give the user the option to restart the game and play again. So let's start with the scoring system. There are a number of ways that we could do this, but the way I'm going to do it is to create a gap, essentially. So an SK node, which represents that gap there, and then when the bird comes into contact with the gap, the score increases by 1. So we can use our collision detection again to detect that collision. So we'll do that in the make pipes method, because we'll need to do it every time pipes are made, and I'll add it in after the pipes. So my gap is going to be just an SK node. So like the floor, essentially, we're not going to need a texture or sprite image for this. Then let's set the gap position. So this is going to be a CG point. And we want the X coordinate to be the same as the X coordinate of the pipes. So I'm just going to copy that one down. And we want the Y coordinate to be the center here. So the center of our gap. And that's going to be the center of the screen plus the offset. Remember, the offset is the amount that the pipes are moved up or down from the center of the screen. So if we just take center of the screen, so self.frame.mid Y, and add the offset, then that will move the center of the gap to the midpoint between the two pipes. Okay. We need to set up the rectangle for the gap as well. So we'll do that with a physics body. So it's going to have an SK physics body with a rectangle. And this is going to be a CG size. And the size is going to have a width and a height. The width is going to be just the width of the pipes. So we can use pipe texture dot size dot width, and the height is going to be the size of the gap, which is just gap height. There we go. And then a couple of other settings. We're going to need to make sure this is not affected by gravity, because we don't want it falling out the sky. So we'll set is dynamic equal to false. And we also want to apply the same animations to it as for the pipes. So let's take the gap and run move and remove pipes. And I think I've missed off a bracket there. All right, now just before I add my gap, I'm going to need to add some bit masks to it. So let's just add these and then we'll think about what we're going to need these to be. Because we want to be able to detect a collision between the gap and the bird, but we want the bird to be able to pass through the gap. So for that to work, we're going to need a new case in our collider type enum. So I'm going to call this gap and I'm going to set it equal to 4, as I mentioned in the previous video. And then we're going to set the contact test bit mask to bird so that we can detect contact between the gap and the bird. But we're going to set the category to gap, and importantly, we're going to set the collision to gap as well. And that will mean that the bird is able to pass through the gap, but we're still able to detect a collision. All right, then we'll just add that to the scene. And let's just then quickly run that and make sure we can detect that collision. Here we go. I do have to make sure I don't collide with anything else. There we go. Now that might not have been obvious whether or not I collided with the pipe or the gap. So in order to check, let's go back to our didBegin method. And as I mentioned in the previous video, we can use this contact variable to work out what contact actually happened. So, for example, if I want to work out whether it was a collision with the gap or not, then I can look at contact dot and then body A. So every contact happens between two bodies, so body A and body B. We don't know which is which, but it doesn't really matter. And then we can look at body A and take the category bit mask and test to see if that is equal to collider type dot gap dot raw value. So that will test to see if the body A in the collision was a gap. Of course, it's possible that body B could be a gap as well. So we'll just look for contact.bodyB.category bitmask to be equal to collider type dot gap dot raw value. So that's essentially looking to see if either of the objects involved in the collision was a gap. And if it was, then we want to add one to the score, etc., etc. For now though, we'll just print add one to score. And otherwise, I'm actually going to comment these out at the moment because they require me to be good at this game and able to navigate through the gaps easily. So we have contact essentially means we have a game over, and add one to score means I've collided with the gap. So let's see if I can trigger. There we go. So I've managed to trigger both there. It's definitely not easy to get through these gaps. There we go. But either way, you can see that we are detecting those correctly now. So we're adding one to the score, or we have contact if the game is over. All right, so it's a good idea to know that we're adding one to the score, but that's not much good to the user. So let's see how we can add a label or a node to our games. I'm going to go for the middle of the screen at the top here. And we're going to create it up here. So I'll call it score label. And this is going to be an SK label node. So as we've discussed, anything on the screen is a node, and this of course is a certain type of node, which is a label. So that's our score label. Let's add it in the didMoveToView method. I'll pop it at the bottom here. So to add a label, we just add a number of settings for this label. So first off, we'll give it a font. I'll just use the standard Helvetica, so nice and simple. We need to give it a font size. So I think about 60 pixels should be about right, but as always, you can experiment with other values if you like. We need to give it an initial value. So the initial score will be 0. And we'll give it an initial position as well. So this is a CG point. And the X coordinate, as I say, is going to be in the middle. So self.frame.midx. Whoops. There we go. And for the Y coordinate, we want it at the top of the screen. So we'll set that to self.frame.height divided by 2. That will take it to the top of the screen. And then we'll minus 70 from that to give it a little bit of padding. So that will give it 10 pixels of padding down from the very top of the screen. And there we go. So now we just need to add that to the scene. So self.addChild and score label. And here we go. So there's our score of 0. Then if we just check that, yep, we've now got a score of 2. You see, I managed to get 2 in that first one, which is only because I went out of the gap and came back in. But in the actual game, we wouldn't be able to do that because we would hit the pipes and the game would be over. So we don't need to worry about that happening in our game. Great. Okay, so now it's just a matter of setting up the option for the user to play again. And to do that, we'll set up a game over label, which again is just going to be an SK label node. And we want to create this when the game is over. So let's bring these back in again. I don't think we need the console messages anymore. So let's set up our game over label. And I'll spell label right, shall I? Might as well. So game over label dot font name as before. Helvetica. We'll set the font size a bit smaller this time because we've got some more text to put in. So I'm going to put 30. Set the game over label text to be game over. And then tap to play again. And finally, we'll set the position. And this is going to be a CG point using, for our X coordinates, self.frame.midx, and the Y coordinates, self.frame.mid Y. And then let's add that to the scene. All right. So let's now check and see if that works. So now when the user dies, we should get a nice game over message. Of course, the tap to play again bit won't work just yet. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so we've got our message and the game stops. We just need to get this tap to play again system working. Unfortunately, we're already in a position to do this because we've got game over being true when the game is over. So all we need to do is to put all of our code to reset the game here in touches began if game over is not false. So what do we need to do to restart the game? Well, first, let's set game over to be false again. We'll set the score back to 0. And then we'll also set up the speed of the scene to be full speed again. So that's 1. Now, the trickiest bit is to remove all of the existing pipes and the label here, and then to set everything back up as it was at the beginning. But that's actually reasonably straightforward to do. So we can take our scene and we can remove all children from it. So that will remove everything from the screen that we've added. So now it's just a matter of running essentially the code in didMove to view again. So we don't need to add the contact delegate again, but everything else I'm going to take out of here, cut it, and then put it in its own method. I'll call it setupGame. And then we'll just call setupGame from didMove to view. And then we can also call it from here. And there we go. The only slight issue with that is this timer, because we're not quite sure at what stage this timer is going to be, and nothing's actually stopped the timer. So here we could end up with multiple timers running at once if the user plays the game several times. So that's not a major problem. Let's just take our timer and give it a name this time. And then we can set it up each time in setupGame. And when the game is over, we can stop the timer. So let's just find our did contact begin. So here we'll take our timer and we'll invalidate it. So that will stop the generation of new pipes. All right, so let's take a look. We should now find that when we tap to restart the game, everything is removed from the scene and then added in again, so we can start the game from the beginning. So let's get a point if I can. Ah, there we go. All happened so fast, I didn't notice it, but let's try and get a point, and I'll try not to tap after I've died. There we go. And we've got an interesting crash there. I believe that's happening when contact is happening after the game is over. So, for example, if we jump into, there you go, if we jump into the pipes and then fall through the gap, then we'll have contact, but the game will officially be over. So that will cause a crash, probably because of this line, actually, because we've already invalidated the timer and then we're trying to invalidate it again. So easy solution to that is just to check if game over is false before doing any of this. There we go. And then we only will invalidate the timer once. So let's just check, make sure that that behaves now as we would want it to. So here we go. Going to try and get a point. Nope, failed. You see, we didn't get a crash there. That's the main thing. So I'm going to tap there. Excellent. Okay, so you can see we've got a small issue with our label here and our label at the top as well. So let's fix that by using the Z position. So we'll set the Z position of the pipes to be -1. Same for pipe 2. And for those wondering about the background, which also has a Z position of -1, we'll set the background to have a Z position of -2, so that that's definitely behind the pipes. So let's check. We should now find that the score and the game over label appears in front of the pipes, as we would want it to. There we go. Yep. I was too quick because I kept tapping. Wonderful. Yep, so that now stays and that's there. The game is actually very hard in its current form, so I'm going to try just changing the impulse to 50, which means you have to probably tap more often, but might make it easier to get through those pipes. Obviously, that's something that you can tweak and make the game as easy or as hard as you like, but I'd like to at least get 1 point before dying. So let's see this in action. Yep, it's now a little bit easier to control. Oh, there we go. I did get a point, but then died straight after. Let me try it one more time. Nope, failed again. Okay, well, I think I can leave that to you to figure out and try and get the balance right to make the game hard, but not too hard. No, failed again. Oh well. But hopefully now then you're fairly happy with how GameKit works. So we've done a lot of work here. We've created our backgrounds, we've created animations for them to move them along, we've created our sprites and animated them, and then we've created our bit masks to check for contact and collision. We've added the score on, and of course we've added the ability for the user to restart the game when they've finished. So there's obviously a lot more to gaming on iOS, but hopefully this will give you a bit of an introduction and a taste for how it's done. And as always, if you go on and create your own games, please do let me know and I'll check them out and let people know about them on Twitter. For now though, we're going to go back to working with Parse, and we'll be creating probably the most complex app of this course, an Uber clone. I'll see you for that in the next section.